Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the agricultural industry. We aggregate those perspectives and work to elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with Mike Corbus, President and CEO of Central Prairie Cooperative, headquartered in Sterling, Kansas. For those of you that aren't familiar, Central Prairie is a full-service farm cooperative dedicated to supporting agriculture and cultivating the rural lifestyle in the heart of Kansas. Now, in this conversation, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We get into the reality of co-op differentiation, or frankly, the lack thereof, and the three questions that you can ask to cut through the noise and determine how differentiated you actually are from your competitors. We talk about the impact that intrapreneurship has had on Mike and how he and the team at Central Prairie have instilled this in the way that work gets done. We're going to talk about culture and what can be learned and repurposed from different professions and professional experiences when you're looking to establish the culture of an organization. And we even spend some time exploring how to navigate away from a heavily commoditized business model, which of course agriculture is, using an example, a case study that I can confidently say you won't see coming. Before we start, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider leaving us a review to let us know how we're doing. It's the very best way you can support the show, and it never costs you a thing. Thank you as always for joining us today. And with that, here's my conversation with Mike Corbus of Central Prairie Cooperative. Mike, something that I've observed is that many cooperatives claim to be differentiated, and they certainly are with the words they use to describe themselves, but oftentimes the differentiation isn't, I would necessarily, reflected or felt in the nature of the business. For example, I think everyone's going to say that they're grower focused, that they provide exceptional service, that they're committed to providing market access to their growers. And I'm not saying these things are not important, and I'm certainly not saying that these co-ops are not doing them, but I often posit that the ideas behind them are not necessarily unique to them. They're not a differentiated value proposition. And I guess I'm curious how you think about that at Central Prairie and how you ensure that you're actually offering a differentiated value proposition to your members and to your customers.
I think the most important thing is a close look at ourselves in the mirror. And so a term I've used is ripping the Band-Aid off, so to speak. And one of the things that we did initially, and we do this occasionally anyway, is there's really probably three questions that I like to throw out there and see what kind of response I get from our own staff. The first would be is, what do we actually do different than anyone else? And, is there anything we do different? Being honest, brutally honest with ourselves. Another question that I ask a lot is, what do we do better? And typically one of the first things you'll hear is customer service. And to be honest, if you ask yourself, well, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true at some locations, not at others. We like to all naturally think we provide the best. But even if we do, is that enough? Does that move the needle? You might also hear, well, we're better priced. Well, maybe in some cases, maybe that's important. What about inventory? Do we inventory enough products, the right products, things like that? The other one, the bigger question, the elephant in the room, is, why do we have competitors? So it's something that came to mind years ago. And initially, I think, just my own personal opinion, is that if you start out from a position of you're the only entity in town, let's say for a while, others will naturally look and say, well, there's room for more. That's a good business to be in, and you can't possibly serve everybody, so there's room for more. But that quickly dries up. And so if you go around the room, and in a co-op, we've got multiple divisions, and you ask each division, how many competitors do you have? List them out. How many do you have? And again, why are they here? Why do you have so many? And the brutally honest question, or the answer, I think, is probably because there is either a perceived or a real weakness, that they saw some break in the armor there, that they felt there's an area that they can do better, they can be cheaper, faster, whatever it might be. And just taking a really brutal look at yourself to start with.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if I think about those first two questions, what do we do differently and what do we do better? What do we do differently is really, are we doing something in the marketplace in terms of a product that we offer, a service that we offer that nobody else has? Meaning it actually is almost a coveted, scarce resource. If they don't come to us for this advice, if they don't come to us for this product, if they don't come to us for this service, they can't get anywhere else. That's sort of the binary yes or no. Are we differentiated? What do we do better is how we bring that product, that service, that advice to market, and then really looking at that and saying, is that meaningfully different? And to your point around customer service, I think that's where things start to get pretty uncomfortable. There's not a co-op out there that's not going to say that they're not focused on safety and customer service. And so if you really look at it, and if you don't find a differentiation, it's probably at the front end, it's just important to acknowledge and accept it, right? It's not necessarily a point against you. It's just perhaps highlighting the fact that you have an opportunity to maybe think differently and try to differentiate. On that third question, though, which I think is probably the one that I could imagine creates the most felt discomfort in the room when the CEO asks it, why do we have competitors? You ask that as a CEO, and I'm thinking about the other CEOs and GMs are listening in. What have you observed? What could someone asking that question for the first time expect to sort of occur in its wake? Meaning, how does a leadership team respond to that? What's the wheel turning between the ears that happens that you've observed? Do people get defensive? Does it give them pause and they get very reflective? Do they get frozen in the analysis? Do they quickly get motivated to find something different? Kind of just what have you observed and what would someone else doing it for the first time expect?
So the first time I posed that question to a group of our staff, I got crickets immediately, and I'm pretty sure that was because I think naturally we tend to get defensive, and myself included. And then when there's some time given to consider that question and start saying, look, there's hundreds of thousands of businesses out there, millions of businesses, and we all face these kind of challenges, and we cannot move forward if we can't find out where we're at to start with. And so then you start to, if you ask it a couple of times, it's really gets to be fun because people start to really think about it and let that shield drop down and just be brutally honest. Well, maybe it's this or it's that. And all that does is open the door then to get better and find ways to differentiate yourself or improve in certain areas.
And I'm guessing that there's some times where you look at it and say, just a very sober assessment, not that we want to accept mediocre or accept status quo, but you might look at a particular line of the business and say, yeah, you know what? There's nothing more we can do from a service perspective or from a price perspective that's going to differentiate us. This is a commoditized space. We need to be in it because our members require it, but that's not where we're going to differentiate. We're going to accept that we have competitors here. And we also believe that they can't outcompete us in a differentiated way. So we're all going to play the same game, but maybe we just accept that here in service of allocating our focus and our time, differentiating elsewhere in the business, if that makes sense.
I think that's a great insight that helps to triage, I guess, your situation and prioritize things.
Yeah. So one of the outcomes I would imagine from a question like that, and I'm imagining myself sitting there and having you ask me that question, I mean, being unprepared to answer it. And after I get over he's picking on me or I failed or whatever, my emotions would be in response to that, it then presumably or ideally would inspire folks to go out and start thinking pretty creatively about the business and what you could do differently and almost be entrepreneurial and saying, okay, what else can we do? But entrepreneurs somewhat operate without constraints other than capital because they aren't in large organizations. There generally isn't hierarchy. They're very hyper responsive to the needs of the market because they're creating from scratch. How does this show up in Central Prairie? As folks take this challenge or mandate from you to think why we have competition and go out and create value. How do you kind of instill that in the organization? Well, how do you enable it?
Well, I think it maybe the second or third time you ask that and have a discussion, it starts to build courage in the team. Initially, we would all be a little hesitant to maybe say what we really think in a group that large for fear of retribution or being ridiculed or whatever it might be. So the courage, I think, comes into play. But that really is, how do I put this? It's a key component of building intrapreneurship. And I struggle with that word myself a little bit. My father was very entrepreneurial, and now, inside of a company, fostering a culture of entrepreneurship. And that's kind of what this is a catalyst for that, if you will.
So entrepreneurship is an interesting concept. I'm going to give you an armchair definition here, and I'd love to have you feed it back to me since you spend more time thinking about this than I do. But it's the entrepreneurial energy or spirit perhaps applied within an existing organization that has a set of shared objectives, has an established set of customers, has a defined marketplace that you're going after, but is maybe finding the new and novel and innovative ways to meet the needs to grow the business and serve those producers. I'm thinking out loud here. How would you define entrepreneurship, I guess?
Well, I think you did it perfectly. It's, in my terms, I would say it's a can-do attitude. If you have an entrepreneur is going to create their own business, let's say, and run with that. But if you find purpose within your employment, it's an attitude where I think you have the courage and the permission to, I hate to use the old term, look outside the box, but that really is what it is about. And it kind of energizes people. And those who have it naturally, you'll identify that right away. But the goal is let's build more of that. I know you can't be 100%, or maybe even you'd probably be lucky if you're 15%, to be honest with you. But there are those individuals in every organization that are close. And if you open the door, that'll improve the team.
They'll run right through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think entrepreneurship helps people understand the need and the willingness to change in an organization. It definitely creates innovation and does combat stagnation in an organization. And one of the things that when you talked about differentiation, I think sometimes in the cooperative space, we're usually surrounded by other cooperatives. We all have borders, quote, other soft borders, but so we tend to look at other cooperatives. But one of the things I noticed is that when I got a list of our competitors from our department heads, most of them are not cooperatives. They're specialized businesses. They're doing, we're doing everything, and they're doing one of those things. And they do not operate under a cooperative business model. So it's highly important, I believe, that a certain amount of your leadership and staff also has the ability to think outside of the cooperative space, because how do you compete with someone if you don't understand how they conduct their business? What constraints do they have or they don't have that you do that maybe puts up a barrier, to our own business? It builds better leaders and builds a better team, frankly.
For sure. I guess I'm wondering, kind of picking at that a little bit. So if the dominant theme that you observed in terms of who are our competitors, if what came back was private, non-farmer owned entities in the marketplace, is that a true reflection of the facts on the ground? Because I know a lot of co-ops that they don't maybe compete in the same way. And maybe you sort of decide you're not going to call on this grower that's right on that sort of that boundary. But if that grower calls you, that's fair game, right? And so do you think that your co-ops actually aren't competing? Or is the real learning of let's focus on the privately held entities, and that will tell us what we can really do better and different?
No, we do compete. I think the differentiator for me is that we compete within the co-op business model and mindset. But it's important to me to not lose sight of the fact that some of the companies we compete with have a completely different mindset and a different set of parameters they operate within. And, that can be pro or con, but to understand that is vital for us to again, to compete with them, but also maybe outpace them if we can.
Certainly. Well, one of the reasons I asked too, I think it's always interesting, 2 co-ops, 3 co-ops, 4 co-ops, however many, that are largely going head-to-head in some overlapping trade area, some particular set of growers that have a particular profile that makes them attractive target customers, whatever the driver is. That competition can be very meaningful and beneficial to that particular grower that those co-ops are competing over. So episodically in the moment, very beneficial in terms of the product availability, the provisioning of the application equipment at the right time, delivery of the grain, whatever the situation is, that's beneficial. But in the aggregate, all that competition somewhat comes at the expense of growers in the aggregate, right? Because the more those co-ops are competing downward to capture the business, the less value that's created that can be distributed more widely. And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but it's just an interesting sort of paradigm there of, in the moment, you can make a meaningful improvement to one grower. But if you chase that as a matter of practice, you might be destroying value for everyone in the process. Just that, random thought. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but...
No, I don't think I could say it better than that, frankly.
So you made a comment here a moment ago about how the spirit of intrapreneurship, combats stagnation. And stagnation is, frankly, probably what begets the fact that you have competitors.
Yes, I think so.
So it's kind of bringing that full circle. So what have you seen, or what are maybe some of the examples, Mike, where intrapreneurship in Central Prairie has helped you build something that customers need or build competitive advantage in the marketplace? I think we can all get our heads around the idea, but it'd be interesting to hear some, if you have any examples where it's actually said, I asked these questions, we encourage this kind of behavior, and here's how the team responded, and here's what it meant for our membership and our community.
Absolutely. So as a result of that question, the last one in particular, why are competitors here, it opened up some understanding about some of the constraints that we have been operating under. And we basically joined a group. Was not my idea. I wish it was, but credit goes elsewhere. But we were an early adopter to join this group. And it's basically an agronomy initiative for input purchasing. So we understood that our customer base, I think we all know that the farmer is facing a very significant challenge in input costs. Also, sometimes there are inventory challenges, supply issues like that. And we needed to regain some autonomy on the cooperative side. In order for us to, how do I help my producer? Well, we need to buy better. If we can help them with their input costs, we need to also gain a little bit more leverage when it comes to supply and making sure that our producers can have access to products in times of tight supply. So we joined this initiative, which is a group of entities, including some other cooperatives, input manufacturers, and also a tech company that pretty much is the glue and holds everything together, helps us manage the ordering process, inventory, and logistics. And the need to do this came out of those questions. The intrapreneurship mindset is being able to look at our situation, if you will, and say, okay, we've identified some problems, but here's what we need to do to solve it. And it's a little bit of a step outside of what we would have done in the past to change this situation for ourselves. So this initiative basically helps us create a more level playing field, regain a little bit of control in how we order. It also opened the door for the cooperative to buy other products that we feel are beneficial for our farmers that we may not have had access to before. Certainly more flexibility and availability, but it also exposes us to other vendors. And a big part of that, though, that I think the advantage that comes with this is it improves our market intelligence. And that market intelligence, involves product. What it does, it involves the inventory and supply, and it also involves the pricing. So more interaction with more vendors for us really opened the door for us. And really glad we did it. But I can tell you it would not have happened if we didn't have a cultural change here.
Yeah, I mean, I love these stories of how cooperatives are cooperating and finding ways to, how do I say this, take some of the critical core processes in the business that everyone has to do, but sometimes the real value that can accrue to the grower is in doing them together.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You've got folks that do, pool their demand on the input side, like what you're talking about here. There's organizations out there that are looking to consolidate or centralize some of the back office processes that exist across every co-op. All really important. None of them competitive advantages, right? Everybody has to post jobs in order to hire people, for example. Everyone needs to be able to administer, I-9 verifications and employee benefits. There's a lot of things that have to happen, but having them happen episodically, one-off in each one of the organizations adds cost to the system. And those costs come at the detriment to the growers' ultimate rewards for participating in the cooperative system. And so I like these stories where co-ops are working together to kind of meet their needs. Now, when you describe it in the context of intrapreneurship, it makes perfect sense. Let's steelman this, though. What are the reasons more cooperatives aren't doing this? Because in the telling, it makes such obvious sense. But let's go from the other angle. Why would you not do this? Whether you agree with those reasons or not, Mike, because this is not the status quo today.
Right. I don't know if we've evolved into a little bit more secrecy. I've not been in the cooperative space for 40 years. Okay, I've been in the cooperative space for probably 10 or 12 years. And knowing what I've heard others talk about that had been in the cooperative space for many years, it seems like there used to be more cooperation. And I don't know if there's just a guarded secrecy involved, or the spirit of competition maybe went a little farther, than initially was anticipated. I don't know.
Yeah. It's just, it's interesting because for the folks that are listening that either hear this idea and have always been skeptical of it, or have found a lot of reasons why it's not going to work. And maybe that's true. Maybe in your particular situation, whoever's out there listening, it's just not the right move. There's not enough value relative to the real or perceived risk of doing it, which I would challenge. But let's accept that as it is for now. We are no longer in an environment where this kind of thing isn't happening, because there are multiple examples and case studies you can point to of cooperatives cooperating in new and different ways, all to the benefit of the producer by, as you said, improving product availability, inventory management, pricing leverage, getting it in times of tight supply, all of that. But again, netting out costs from the organization, or moving costs in the organization, which at the end of the day, that value all matriculates and accrues to the growers in the form of equity and patronage. So I think it's something we really need to challenge ourselves and really almost assume that you ought to do it, and then figure out why not, versus the other way around. If nothing else, is a thought experiment. We can do it quietly amongst ourselves, in the boardroom or in your office, but say, look, why would we not do this? What are the realistic, actual reasons to not pursue it? Because I think there's huge unlock the more we get after this.
Yeah, Joe, one thing I do not like to do is play catch up. So I think in our thinking, another bit to the intrapreneurship is, for lack of a better way to put it, I like our ideas and concepts to leapfrog. I don't like to do things just to catch up. Let's take it beyond that if we can. One other quick example I can give you is we did a thing called the rural market. And it seemed like such a small thing, insignificant, but it really wasn't. This all started with the farm store next door to our office here. Typical. When I got here, came on board, it was old and dusty. Some of the products had been there obviously for a long time. And the new manager at the time, I asked him to look into some of that. He just walked in and came back and informed me that we had a lot of, indeed, we had some things that had been there for a long time, and this place needed a renovation. So the concept just began as a renovation, and trying to do it efficiently, not spend a bunch of money, things like that. But that turned into an idea, again, from the entrepreneurship mindset, was that, well, can't we do something more with that? If we're going to do a renovation, why just stop there? So the idea began that we'd turn this into a rural market. We would showcase some local, or at least Kansas products some of our very own members make whether they be food products or crafts, things like that, to showcase those as part of the rural market. It still has all the legacy products, but we formed a business development committee, and that was, if I remember correctly, 8 people that we'd gotten to know that felt like these are the kind of folks that fit this mindset and they want to grow. And we said, this is what we want to do. I was so excited to see their excitement and what they did with this. We gave them some parameters. The cost was basically what we were going to spend anyway, and told them what we wanted to do. And essentially, they started a business from the ground up when this project started. And I mean, from painting the walls to seeking out vendors, learning how to do vendor deals, learning about the licensing required, learning about advertising. We started an e-commerce site out of the deal. That creating the narrative involved with some of these products and how they're member made, Kansas made. I think it was probably one of the best training sessions we ever could have put on. And the rural market is a asset for the local community. Does it make us millions of dollars? No, it does not. But the return on it was very much worth the effort, in my opinion.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
I love that story, Mike. It brings a smile to my face for a couple of headline reasons. One, if I'm hearing you correctly, the refresh had to get done, yes or yes?
Yes.
So that time, that money, that disruption, that effort, that was on the plan either way. By letting the reins loose a bit and letting the team run, you said it was a great lesson that was learned. I bet they didn't realize they were even taking a class in the process.
I don't think they did.
Which is kind of, that's experiential learning textbook. Right? They're putting into practice. We've got the freedom to operate. We're thinking creatively. We're learning the skills around, you said, narrative and storytelling, product placement, vendor negotiations, the physical display within the store, the way you organize your inventory. I mean, it's all of that wrapped in the fact that it had to happen anyways. You've completely de-risked the experimentation. Because at the end of the day, if it failed, you still had a renovated farm store.
Correct. And I can assure you, I learned plenty out of it as well. There's just always things that you don't think of that come up, and like, oh, okay, that's another thing we have to tackle. But I was exceptionally proud of the group and watching them take this and run with it, and they were proud too, and they deserve it.
That's great. What a great story of entrepreneurship and kind of entrepreneurship applied, right? It's not just this sort of abstract concept of this aspirational goal, how we want to behave. You can point to it and say, here's 2 examples you can put your fingers on and say, this is exactly what we mean. But that's, I think, a pretty good transition to something I wanted to ask you about here today, Mike. And
sure.
So entrepreneurship is really, I would say, it feels probably like an aspect or a core tenet of the culture. I think you even used the term culture here a few minutes ago, what you're trying to build with the organization. Now, you have had a remarkably unique background and career path that we discussed when we met earlier this year. And we'll talk through it, I think, in a minute here. I'll invite you to talk through it. But for our listeners, Mike started his career in law enforcement. He eventually went running his own business, which he'll surprise you with what that exactly was. Eventually then moved into oil and gas, commodity brokerage, and now president and CEO of Central Prairie Co-op. As you look back over the span of your career, Mike, what would you say you've learned about the role of culture and organizational performance? And how have you applied what you learned to the benefit of the co-op? Entrepreneurship is clearly one example, but even the concept of culture, I'd love to kind of hear what you learned over your career and how you're putting that to work now.
Certainly. So I obviously never intended to be a student of culture like everyone else. I sought a career, and I think I was the typical younger person back in the day that was fairly idealistic, and I was going to help save the world. And due to some influences, I chose law enforcement. So at 21 years of age, as early as I could, I became a patrol officer, and moved up through that and became on the SWAT team, and ultimately a statewide narcotics officer. But the thing that I think made the bigger impression on me was that is a very rigid military-like culture. And most law enforcement agencies are that way. Many of the people that are in law enforcement are former military. There's not much room for discretion in that environment. The discipline is a requirement, decision making. You have certain parameters, and the decisions often have to be made on the spot without much time for consideration.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly can be life and death. You'll learn a lot about leadership, and also very important is team dedication. So culturally, like I said, there's not much room for expansion there, but it does serve its purpose. Because of the nature of that business, I do believe it probably is necessarily more rigid. The team dedication was also very important because you understand that if you drop the ball, you can readily see the ramifications to everyone else. And I'm not sure that everything we do in life is quite that apparent. The leadership, just even simple calls, having to actually take charge of a situation and sort it out, the methods in which that occur. So I felt like that was a very important aspect. And also, I think all CEOs today would recognize this pretty readily, is that you'll make decisions, and later on you'll have a chance to go back and piece those out. And maybe it wasn't perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but did it work? And self-analyze. Why not? You have time for that later. But I learned a lot there. But after 10 years of that, as you might imagine, there's a lot of negativity in law enforcement. You deal with criminals, and then when you deal with good citizens, it's usually when they are under duress.
It's the worst day of their life.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that does wear on you. And it was time for me to make a change. I needed a little bit more happiness in my life. So my wife and I started a photography business. Now, I had picked up my first...
The natural point of transition from law enforcement and SWAT team. Yeah.
Total change. And I was an adrenaline junkie, but that wears off on you as you get older. So I had been doing photography since I was 11. So now I'm 31 years old, and we started a business. And I will tell you, I left in law enforcement. In those days, you get 20 in, you pretty well have a retirement locked in. So I left halfway through and took this big chance to start a business. And 85% of new businesses fail. So it was a risk. And I think I had 3 months worth of work lined up when I left. The day that I walked out of the police department, when my notice was up, it really hit me. Like, I don't have a choice. I have to make this work now.
Yep.
And so wife and I got along great. But what I learned mostly out of this was just general business practice, finance, sales, and marketing, the psychology behind it. What people say they want and what they actually want may not always be the same, believe it or not. Learning how to watch behavior, forecasting. And then we went through a very, very major transformation in that industry. And we can talk about that later if you like. Because of that disruption, we decided that some of the fun had gone out of that business for us. And I had an opportunity to go another direction completely into the oil and gas industry.
I'm going to jump in I don't want to assume, but the disruption was, I would presume it's digital photography.
It was.
Digital cameras, cell phones, smartphones, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Technology, very much so. And here we go again in everybody else's industry today. So when I transitioned to oil and gas, I had an opportunity because of my now business experience. But I didn't know anything about oil and gas. But this involved a rapid transition into working for the first time in my life, a large international corporation with over 5,000 employees. I went through a lot of transformation there. I really got an exposure to a completely different culture. I learned logistics, sales, hedging, again, leadership. But what I noticed the most about that culture, Joe, was it was a fun culture. And some people, if you say the word corporation today, a lot of people instantly go to a negative place. And, like anything else, it's got its pros and cons. But what I enjoyed about it was believe it or not, it was a group of entrepreneurs. Now, when you're going to manage 5,000 people worldwide, as you might imagine, there's a lot of process and procedure, and it's also fairly rigid.
Certainly.
But it was energetic and competitive within the group. So we would, if we had a competitor moving into a space, you could see everybody's eyes light up. So instead of everybody going, oh, now what? It was an opportunity to do something different.
It was signal.
It was. Yeah. And you could see the group, and we would go into, yes, we called it a war room with a big map of the U.S. because we were all over the U.S. and indeed all over the world. And immediately everybody would set about tackling this issue. Everybody wanted to win. That was refreshing. It was great to see. I enjoyed it a lot. But that industry, much like agriculture, is boom and bust. And it became apparent to me that to further our career in that area, I would need to move down to Houston. At the time in my life, I had kids and the home and everything. We decided not to. We're Kansas people. We wanted to stay in Kansas. I thought it a natural transition because of the markets to go into agriculture. So I transitioned my career into being a grain originator and a commodities broker ultimately. And because of that, I got exposed to the cooperative culture. So I worked for a company as an originator that was part of one co-op, but as I was a commodities broker and my territory expanded, I was exposed to probably 8 or 9 other co-ops and learned what that culture is. And I think I gained enough that when this opportunity came up in my career to come to Central Prairie Co-op, I jumped at it because I had known Central Prairie enough to become attached, frankly, to many of the producers and the co-op itself, and wanted to be a part of it.
That's incredible. I had sort of had the benefit of the overview prior, but thanks for walking us through it. How do you say harvest from each one of those experiences the attributes of culture that you think could package together a successful culture at Central Prairie? How do you aggregate all of that without becoming schizophrenic? Because you've operated such wildly different cultural environments.
Well, I think just being exposed to them and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and then trying to ultimately come up with, like we all do, let me just take the best pieces of what worked and can we shape that into our own culture? I think anybody would agree that probably the toughest thing to do with any company is change a culture. And then if you do, maintain what you've achieved, right? And, we're not, I don't know that we'll ever be the ultimate goal. It's always an ongoing process. But, I looked at the law enforcement, I could see the necessity of some of it, but I could also see that, that's not actually an environment a lot of people want to work in. It's not always the most friendly environment. I'm not talking about dealing with criminals, just internally. It's more the old school, this is the way it is, and there's the door. If you don't like it, hit the road.
Yep.
And then owning my own business, you don't have as much freedom as you think you have. There's a lot of pressure there, and all of our farmers very well understand that. The oil and gas industry, again, a lot of parameters, but now you're dealing with people from all over the world, different cultures, just in that respect. But there's a lot that was done right there, and I really, again, enjoyed the can-do attitude that I saw there. And then coming into the cooperative culture and understanding the history and where we came from and looking at the pros and cons there. And then again, at the end, just trying to say, I've had all these experiences and I know what I felt like worked and moved the ball to the next yard line.
Yeah.
And let's put that in place here. Let's make that work.
So I'm curious, I heard you talk about how the understanding the importance of sales and marketing and finance and that the connective tissue underlying all the businesses is something you really took out of owning your own business. So the business acumen is a core part of the culture. Talking about the commodity brokerage, the oil and gas, that's where you use the word intrapreneurship. So I'm guessing you got that feeling of the importance of intrapreneurship through that organization as well, that you can innovate and change and respond within the confines of an existing company. Commodities brokerage, you talked about, I'm sure you were exposed to mitigating farmers' risk and focus on service and all those things. I guess looking back to the first part of your career, what's the one thing that you've carried forward from law enforcement that you think is the most applicable, given that it's a wildly different operating environment than the typical co-op? What has transferred for you?
If I was to pick one, it's probably decision making. The importance of not letting things fester or remain unresolved. Absolutely. I'll say this. I worked under a couple of different chiefs, and one of them in particular was very old school. And one valuable lesson I learned is that I didn't always like the decisions, but it was done.
Right.
And so you had closure. Like, okay, now I know where to move from. There was good value in that.
Yeah, a decision you don't agree with is still a decision that has been made.
Yes.
You're not laboring under the ambiguity of what are we going to do. And
right.
I think that's, unless of course you feel ethically conflicted or it's unlawful or not compliant with some regulation, in which case it's a whole different deal. But a decision that you just feel like you would have done differently, still celebrate the fact that at least the decision has been made. No one likes to labor under an environment where no one decides anything.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few more minutes here, and I want to go back to something you mentioned before in the context of running your own business. So the question that occurs to me, Mike, is, you've had the personal experience. You're in a specialty industry, I would say, photography.
Yes.
I don't know anything about the business, but I'm going to presume that it's in that time, if you're a specialty photography studio and photographer, it's probably a low volume, high margin business. I've had wedding photos taken. The price per photo is not a bargain discount.
A little frightening, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little frightening. That's why you only do it once. So you went from almost like I would say as a specialty industry, low volume, high margin. And I don't know exactly what the competitive dynamics were, but clearly the advent of technology suddenly at a relatively low cost puts a nearly infinite volume of photos in people's within reach, whether they have a digital camera with an SD card or more recently smartphones. And so I'm thinking about this in the context of a co-op, in that case, you sort of, I don't know, would you say you became commoditized or that business became a commodity business?
Well, it might help if you're okay with this. Let me lay a quick little background of that
Please.
industry and where we were at. So actually the industry was centered around high volume, low margin. So when I got into this, most studios would charge, they would call it different things like a sitting fee, session fee, or whatever. In our day, it was like $25. That did not cover the cost of the film and developing even. Okay. And then they would charge, say, $50 for an 8x10. And everybody had packages and whatnot. So in a nutshell, what the business model was for that industry was, I just need to get you in the door, and then I'm going to hope that you order enough that we make money. I think that's a very poor business model. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to be honest, do we see some parallels there with our industry? Yeah, I think we do. We operated a carriage trade business, which what that is we spent more time. We built more relationships with our customers. And I definitely believe that we produced a better quality outcome. Okay. The images we created were better quality. Now, I met a gentleman one time and he was frustrated. He was in the industry and he said, I've spent years perfecting this, as had I. Good at what I do. This is pre-digital. I need to get paid for my expertise. People will pay other professionals, and this $25 session fee thing will never cut it. At that time, high school senior photography was big, and the national average was about $250 total you'd make per senior that you photographed. Now, this gentleman took a risk and he started charging $300 as a session fee. And he told me that, some of his peers laughed at him and said, you're going to go out of business. Well, he didn't go out of business. He prospered. His national or his average sale for a senior was $700. Okay, this is back in the like 1998. We adopted the same model. We achieved an $800 average sale. And it taught me a lot about the psychology of a customer. Okay. Now, you've heard of the 80-20 rule, everybody has, and it's some other balance. It's not always 80-20, but the carriage trade is catering towards the smaller number. Okay. I can afford to spend more time and give you something better, but it does cost more. Okay. Well, now to me, that was enjoyable, and I tend to lean that way. So in the co-op culture, we always say it's a relationship business, and that's true. Okay. So we always focus on that. Here's what happened though. This was very eye-opening to me. Digital came along. All right. And I'm going to be brutally honest about my own response to this. It wasn't the greatest, at least initially. I looked at it. Some lab rep brought me an 8x10. I looked at it and I said, that's junk. That's terrible. I'm safe. Well, what I didn't realize is that that technology changed incredibly fast. Within a year, I'm looking at 20x24 enlargements that are as sharp, as dynamic, and everything as film was. So I thought I was set. I had all the equipment bought. We were set for life. This is what we want to do. It's great. And by the way, our customers value the quality and they're willing to pay for it. Well, let me tell you how that went. Very quickly, what I noticed was customer behavior. Okay. Forget what they tell you. And I hate to say this, a lot of people will cringe when I say this. Yes, you want to find out what your customers want and what they tell you, but they tell you more by what they do with their wallet. Okay.
100%.
So all of a sudden, people are coming to us saying, hey, can you do this special effect? Or, hey, this was black and white, but this part was color. Oh, yeah, that requires digital, new technology. Okay. So what I noticed is that people that would spend more and were patient and would wait, all of a sudden, what they valued was completely different now. They valued instant gratification. They valued more options. And yes, in some cases, they valued spending less. Okay. This all happened within the span of a year. It was that quick. So we found ourselves, especially me, I'm not the most computer literate, but I sure had to learn how to be. And I dove in and learned all the new technology and all the techniques and whatnot. So it was frightening. Frankly, it was largely a negative experience at first, but here's the light at the end of the tunnel. It brought in a lot of new opportunities. So what we found out is the way you make money, it looks different. What value you provide to the customer is different than it used to be. And that's okay. It's what the customer wants. So that old saying about, stick to what's in your wheelhouse. Well, what if what's in your wheelhouse, the customer no longer wants, or they don't want it quite as much? So, for example, one of our sales challenges was the typical old way with a print is, here's a little 4x5 print I'm going to show you, and here's 20 of them or whatever it was. I want you to see the impact of that and want to buy. And by the way, I want to sell you an enlargement because there's profit in that. And then I want to upsell. I want to put you in a nice frame that works with that. Most people can't quite see that initially, right? The visualization process. What digital did is all of a sudden now, I'm not spending money on film developing and making proof prints. I've got a digital file that I'm projecting onto a wall, and that print is 20x24, and I'm projecting it in a frame I want to sell you. And guess what happened to the sales? They went through the roof that way. So new opportunities.
Well, I mean, in that last case there, you're going back to what's the ultimate objective I have as a business owner, and then the technology just changes my path to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking if you remain agnostic to the means by which you apply your art, which photography as an art form, it can be deeply personal, I would imagine, right? It's easy for me to flippantly say, well, just if the technology gets you the same outcome, who cares? Move on. That's not exactly how the human spirit would adjust to that. But it's interesting, As a side note, you made the comment there of what people say they want and what they do with their wallet are two wildly different things. I learned that myself launching my own business. The people I asked, hey, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Is that a good idea? And the feedback I got from them. And then the people who reach into their wallet to retain us for work in those early couple of years. It's not a weak Venn diagram. It's not a Venn diagram at all. It's two bubbles that exist in entirely different universes. And it wasn't because people were being untruthful. It just maybe in the abstract, it sounded like a good idea, but push comes to shove, it wasn't actually what they were willing to pay for. So that's my own sort of feeding back my own experience. But you made a really interesting observation there around the gentleman who switched the business model to go from $25 sitting fee to $300, and $300 against what up to that point I think you said was generally $250 was the average total sale to a student. Well, they were doing $300 just to sit, $700, $800 being the net proceeds. So just a 3x growth in the business. And then you did the same and followed that along. There's some psychology around the perceived value when you're expected to pay more. We all know that if someone's willing to do an assessment for you for free, you will treat the results with just as much value as you have laid out, versus if they charge you $500, you're going to at least read the report. But I'm guessing going from $25 sitting fee, $250 total sales to $300 sitting fee, $700 total sales, that requires some discipline around communicating value, which is something that we struggle with within cooperatives, is actually valuing the services that we provide, particularly the ones that don't come with a product in a jug. What did you observe around communicating value? Was that part of the equation, Mike, in making that adjustment? And how did you do that? And what might we learn about that for cooperatives?
So we started in an industry that was highly commoditized. Some of us were trying to decommoditize it and having some success locally. Okay. That's a conversation cooperatives have had, right? The ag industry. And then disruption came and it went full bore back to commoditization. I think trying to put that value was understanding that there were two buckets mainly. There's more, but I'm just going to keep it more simple. You got the ones who value the relationship, okay, on the ag side, the relationship, and if you're delivering a product, the quality of service. And then those who are more price conscious, and I need it now. I don't need the relationship, just solve my problem, right?
Right.
I think we're now in ag seeing a transformational point here. So the way we communicate, we didn't know we needed cell phones until we had them and what they're capable of doing. And so we still have members today that value the relationship. They want more input from our staff, but we're seeing less and less of that as time goes on. So I think you've breached this topic in some previous podcasts, and I don't really have I'm not going to offer a prime answer here other than to say that I think we have to navigate this transformation. Where it ultimately ends up, I don't know. I believe in cycles. So if we completely go one way, that'll last for however long and it'll change back again. Mm-hmm. But for the time being, what we can see in the future is that as a co-op, we have to still take care of those members that have that one set of values. But we also better be prepared to navigate a new way to communicate and a new expectation from another generation of customers.
100%.
That's what we're trying to do with our culture and the entrepreneurship mindset is what we're trying to do internally here.
And through that all, one closing thought here, as you're driving that change and looking to have the courage to advocate for your value. If you think about back to one of your earlier questions around why do we have competition? If you look at the way you do things, or you're looking at doing something new, and you believe that it's valuable, then you ought to make sure you have the ability to articulate why it's valuable to the customer as well, right? We are good at being able to describe the benefit to producers, and that is directly tied to the outcomes we're trying to create. And the ways we do that will shift. As you said, the business model will shift. It'll commoditize, it'll decommoditize. It'll commoditize again, it'll decommoditize over time. But in the pursuit of identifying, here's what they need, here's what delivers value, here's how we deliver it better, the last piece is then having the courage to be willing to be compensated for it. and communicating that and asking for it. And I think that's something the folks that are really good at it are really obnoxious. They're probably too good at it. The rest of us have room to move and improve.
Sure.
Because it's an uncomfortable thing. But at the end of the day, if you truly are delivering something that's differentiated and of value, you ought to be able to command the pricing power behind it.
It really is filling the need. So in the photography mindset, those who wanted a higher level of image recognized the time involved and the expertise it took to do that back in those days. And they were willing to pay for it. So if you have a farmer that wants that relationship, they want that one main connection at the co-op that's going to take care of them, offer them advice, talk to them about how many dollars per acre they can make. That's one set. And then you have another set of producers out there that are running their own business, have their own ideas, and they don't necessarily want that from you. So the value I bring to you is that I won't clutter you with that if that's not what you want, but I will fill this gap over here that you need with your business model. So being able to fill or solve those problems is our value.
Well said. Well, that's a great place to leave it, Mike. I really appreciate, we covered a lot of ground here, from intrapreneurship to culture to managing a decommoditization swing. Really appreciate the insights that you bring and the work that you're doing. And I just want to say thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Well, Joe, I'm gratefully appreciative of being able to join this podcast. I listen to it all the time, and I've been excited because it feels like a lot of the topics you talk about are right on and very timely. I don't always hear that from all avenues, so I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Well, we love to hear that, and we always, in every show, and I'll do it now, we encourage our listeners to let us know when we're hitting the mark and when we're not, and what else we need to be talking about, because that's why this exists. That's why we spend the time and the resources trying to put this out each week. And so thank you again, Mike, for joining, and to our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the Pacesetter Pod community and taking the time to listen in and consider ways to turn strategy into outcomes in your agribusiness. As always, and as Mike just alluded to, let us know how we're doing. Leave us a review. Get in touch with me. Let us know what we need to be talking about, where we're getting it wrong, what else we need to be exploring. That's how we make this better and how we add more value to the work that you're all doing. Thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to having you join us next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.